Hey, Victor, welcome to the show.
Hey Alex, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I've been really looking forward to talking to you. Over here at WebriQ, we're huge believers in headless CMS and kind of what they can really deliver the marketing world. And you being involved with Strapi, it's a CMS that we've used, and I'm just really excited for what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, same here. Thanks again for the invite.
Absolutely. So we were talking previously, and we were really kind of chatting about what the marketing world really is looking for in their tools and how they manage their content and publish. And there's this really high demand for no code solutions. Um, and some people might hear no code and not even know what we're talking about. But what do you think is really driving the no code kind of process, or that whole section of the market, especially in the marketing world?
Yeah, so let's start with a quick definition to level set and make sure everybody is aware of what we mean when we say low code, no code. Uh,
Yep.
so I I think we can all agree that mostly they are buzzwords. They've been like there's a lot of hype around the terms, and it's starting to emerge with a lot of new tools are being created. I feel like every week. I think a good way to define it is yet another level of abstraction. Because when you think about it, really, you have operating, well, actually, like all the way down, you have like bits and bytes. And then you have a first layer of abstraction, which is operating systems. And on top of
Hmm.
that, you have programming languages and libraries. And then you have low code, and you can even go all the way up to no code. So, really, what we mean when we talk about no code, I think it's you rely a lot more on WYSIWYG. So, what you see is what you get rather than code. And so, to answer your question about what is driving the shift to no code, I think it's because, frankly, there's not enough developers and everybody struggled to hire the best talents. And as a result, companies are turning to solutions that enable them to be autonomous. So marketing teams, so they don't have to rely on developers that are extremely busy and busy building the product as opposed to building the company website. So I think that is the fundamental reason why we've seen a lot of no-code tools appearing in the market, um, and yeah, empowering marketing teams to be more self-sufficient.
Yeah, well, and I can kind of agree with that worldview, right? So, like, it's basically in your eyes a lack of labor, and so folks that don't know how to code, on the flip side, I think a lot of marketers really want to have control as fast as possible, and they don't want to necessarily wait on development or rely. A lot of folks will tell me, I don't want to rely on developers, which is fairly ironic because they're using no code tools that are developed, right? And they are heavily reliant on developers. But like, it's kind of like when you buy a hamburger and you don't necessarily want to know how the burger was made. It's like in some instances there can be some of that conceptualization, um, but you know there is some truth like that. Marketers should be able to quickly make changes and manage their experiences, and so no code, I can understand why it's so popular, right? But there's every time you get something, you lose something. As you kind of look at the no code arena, what do you see as the pros and what do you see as the cons to using no code solutions in your marketing?
Right. So to me, the biggest advantage of a no-code platform or low-code actually is the time to production. So you can very quickly build an MVP or like a prototype,
Mm-hmm.
and so that has a lot of value, especially in enterprise, for instance, where in order to get buy-in, you have to show something that kind of works. And so with no code and low code, you're able to show something that you can actually like use and show how like the workflow and the processes will work a lot better than like a prototype in Figma or something like that. So you can build those prototype a lot more cost effectively. I think that's one of the biggest advantage of no code. The second one is, again, autonomy, not being able to rely on developer, as you said, and essentially iterating on messaging a lot quicker. You don't need to, you can instantly see your changes, and not just content changes, but also design changes, maybe even A/B testing things. And the last thing I think is cost. Again, like you're able to, it kind of depends if we're talking about like a small, like 5 pages website, where, you know, like that's just, is more than a prototype. You can actually go to production with a no-code tool to build such small websites. So for many use cases and small teams, when you just kind of have a quick, you know, presentation of your business, but you're not really using your website as a core part of your business. You're not building a SaaS platform. You just kind of just want a presence on the internet. Then I think a no-code tool is a good fit, because it can be very cost effective. So those are to me, like the main advantage for no code. On the other hand, I think there's a number of disadvantages, and the first one I think is technical debt, because as you build on top of a no code platform, there's a lot of chances that you're going to be stuck at some point, and you're in effect creating technical debt because you end up being so lock into a platform that does not allow for much customization. What you did not really anticipate lead to like that technical debt, and then a costly shift for your business. So I see technical debt as a big of an issue. So customization is also like the big one. There's a number of things you cannot do with a no-code tool, such as creating a programmatic way of creating new pages. Like today with like a CMS, you're able to essentially create a lot of pages really fast for SEO purposes. For instance, at Strapi, we see a number of our users creating those pages on the fly for SEO purposes, like those integrations pages or landing pages. And that's not really easily possible with a no-code tool.
Well, and you said something earlier that was, I think, really important, right? Like, if how you intend to use your website will say a lot about how you should go about building it, right? Like, if your intent is to just publish a brochure that's 2 or 3 pages, and you're not going to rely on it in your marketing mix or in your sales process, like Webflow is a great option. Wix and Squarespace and those kinds of tools can be perfect. But then if you're going to tackle SEO, or if you're going to really start to use your digital presence as a part of your brand and your go-to-market strategy and how you interact with your customer, there are still some, nice things about iteration, quickly learning things, changing your messaging. But eventually, right, you have to migrate up. And can you explain a little bit more about technical debt? Because I think that's something that a lot of people breeze right by, right? Like, because it's kind of, you're basically saying that like a website is an iceberg, right? And what a lot of folks in the marketing world and business world are very focused on is that tip of the iceberg, right? And what's below the surface can be missed. And I think that's what you're really alluding to when you say technical debt. But when you say, can you just kind of maybe give us a little bit more information on what in your eyes technical debt means?
Right. I mean, so technical debt, in my opinion, is happens when you quickly make a decision to go with a tool without like really anchoring around the use case and the requirement. And so you end up going with the platform, you develop on top of it, you spend a lot of time customizing it, and then you realize that you're just really trying to fit a triangle into a square, and that's when, like, you start like understanding that you probably chose the wrong tool, and then so you ended up building a lot of things that you're going to need to throw away. And that's what technical debt is when you just have a lot of code that is been built but is not going to be used in the end.
Yeah, a square peg in a round hole, or a triangle peg in a square hole. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, right? I usually talk to customers and clients from that, or the other thing that can happen is, like, if you select an all-in-one no-code tool, right, and it's trying to do everything, but your brand only needs like 25% of the tool, right? And that's like another way to think about technical debt, right? Is like, we're only using a sliver of what this tool is supposed to do, but we're paying for all of this tool. So even though it might be cheaper in the short run, over time it could be, way more expensive, right?
Exactly. Yes. I mean, the cost of maintaining is such a over bloated solution is tremendous to the business. And so, like, there's also the fact that, like, you're kind of locked in. It's, to me, it's very much tied to that lock in and not being able to control your data, and especially with things like GDPR in Europe and other kind of regulation. You really have to be careful about what vendor you select, because migrating to a new solution is not going to be easy. And so you want to make sure you kind of like have that thought out before you start into your evaluation phase, to make sure that what kind of data am I going to be storing? Does it make sense to go self-hosted versus like a SaaS? So I think that's something to really keep in mind. And another thing to consider is, like, to what extent is your use case or your project needs to be omni-channel. But by omni-channel, I mean, like, the content needs to be really consumed from a number of different front ends. So not just as a desktop, but also mobile and many other different places. I feel like now this is where marketing can really shine, is having that consistent brand experience and across all the channels. And so whether you consume the content on the go, on your mobile, whether it's text or audio or video, you do see the same kind of experience throughout. And so that's what really, I think, where some of the tools, more like Headless CMS, makes more sense to me, when you have that need for like a truly omni-channel experience. I think that's where, like, Headless CMS really shines compared to like no-code tools.
Well, and so you mentioned Headless CMS, and earlier again you mentioned, like, the ability to, content management systems is what CMS stands for, is a quick way to create pages and really go after a lot of different advantages from an SEO perspective. Tough to do that on a no-code tool. Is that one of the reasons you think a lot of marketing teams and businesses eventually migrate to a CMS of sorts, right? Just because of they're a square peg, they need a square hole, and they can really achieve that with a CMS and all of the kind of advantages that it brings.
Right. So to me, like, as marketing team and company like scale, like, they usually create a lot more content and have to manage a lot of content from many different sources. So we talk, we sing, we listen, we write, we record, we watch, we stream. We do a number of marketing activities at every different step of the funnel, right? And you have different kind of content to do, like acquisition, but also activation and retention. So you have content. We live in an ocean of content, and so we constantly need to feed our audiences with new, updated, and relevant content. And if you try to do that without a CMS, it can become very inarticulated or unstructured. And so what a CMS provides is really a single source of truth, where you can align all your different team members on one key messaging, but also like from a branding standpoint, you also like that's where you can try to enforce some of the brand guidelines, and so a CMS really helps in that process to make sure you can consolidate everything and consolidate on in terms of the media assets, all the assets that you use to illustrate your content. You can, by centralizing all of that into a CMS, I really think you can gain a lot of velocity and consistency in your branding and messaging. So I think that's the number one reason. Another reason I think is ROI, because as you know, if you spread the content creation and management across many silos, your processes are super inefficient. You need to when you update your tagline, you need to go into 5 different backends to change that tagline. Whereas if you use like your CMS as a content hub, you just update it once and distribute anywhere. So you save a lot of time in terms of velocity of content creation and distribution.
Well, and as a point of, just out of curiosity, do you like when you're talking to marketers, single source of truth can kind of be a strange way for them to kind of comprehend Headless CMS. Do you find Content Hub is just a better way to describe it and kind of get some consensus on what we're talking about when we say single source of truth?
Right. I think like it's an interesting question. I think what we see is that a lot of people actually write their content outside of their CMS, and they use their CMS as a publishing platform. And the collaboration that happens, earlier on in the process actually happens in Google Doc or in Notion, and so that kind of like content iteration and Google Doc has really like amazing like suggestion capabilities, and so that kind of process really happens outside of the CMS. But by Content Hub, I really mean more like from a publishing standpoint. So you can really kind of like go through that one platform to distribute anywhere, and so you're publishing the end state, and it's going to be consistent across all the channels. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, I think that kind of helps describe it. Because I know like I've gotten into trouble saying single source of truth, and people will go, "Oh no, but that's my ERP. Like I don't want to replace my Whereas we're talking about marketing content for your branding and your marketing initiatives, and your front end experiences. And like you said, right, like a lot of people's content is siloed, and they're almost used to that, right? Like they're almost like, well, it's just how you do it, right? I have to manage my content for Alexa over here. I have to manage my content for our landing pages over there. Our main website is here. We might have a subdomain for our blog over there, and before you know it, yeah, they're just comfortable in like operating 5 systems. And like that can, as you said, right, bringing in the concept of a content hub or a single source of truth for your content, it can be really freeing, but also like it's like a different way to think about your content management, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's spot on. I think like everyone's process and workflow are different, so you have to kind of like find the right kind of trade-off between letting the team kind of like come up with the best workflow for them, but at the same time try to provide some a layer of organization and efficiency in the way you manage your content. And I think in terms of ROI, that's what a CMS does, is like it allows you, by creating components that you can reuse in multiple places, you're not essentially redoing the same thing over and over again. And you can just create a component that you use on your homepage, you also use on your landing. And again, like you're just building once and using in multiple places. So I think from an ROI standpoint and content velocity, again, because when you update, not just creation, but also updating content is a lot quicker. So to me, that is the main reason why a CMS makes sense. And a lot of developer tend to, at least I think in the past, tend to create like custom solution or like static websites. And then as the company scales, the marketing team, is needs to be autonomous, and they can't wait for developers to implement the changes. So I think also that's where CMS brings a lot of value to what we were talking about earlier. So content is often the same from like the design to the development to many different steps in the process. And CMS is the glue. To me, it's the glue across all the different stakeholder in the process of building your website or your web app or your mobile app. So I see CMS as the glue. I think it's a good it's a good analogy.
Yeah. Well, and like depending on the size of your organization, you don't have to be astronomically huge to find value in using a content management system. Predicated on what we talked about earlier, are you actually trying to use digital experience for sales, marketing, and brand? And are you really trying to pull value into the organization from your front end, your website, and all the experiences that you can publish, or are you not, right? I think that's kind of like, back to our earlier question, like why does a business consider a CMS or think about leaving those no-code tools for a CMS? It really comes down to like, what are we going to use our website for, right?
Exactly. And to me, it's a spectrum. Like it's a trade-off between being able to quickly get started and up and running with something versus customization capabilities. So you have on one end, like the quick, like how quickly you can get started with something is the no-code aspect, and how customizable you need it to be is more like the headless CMS kind of approach. And so wherever you fit, your use case is on that spectrum is a really good way to make a decision, to help you make a decision.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily black and white, right? It's almost technicolor. there's tons of choices out there. Well, and you've been saying no code, low code. Do you consider those interchangeable, or is there like a difference between what a no code solution is and what a low code solution is?
Right. So to me, no code means like someone with zero technical skills can use. So it's all WYSIWYG, drag and drop. And to me, that's what a no code platform is. With low code, I think you still have to have an understanding of, again, what is an API and how database work. And so to me, it's a headless CMS kind of fit in that low code category because it abstracts away a lot of the complexity of building a custom CMS by providing an admin panel that marketing people can use to be very much autonomous. But you still you can have like your developer work on creating like amazing plugins on top of it and customization capabilities. So it kind of like provides the best of both worlds to me, for as it reconcile developers and marketers and give them both the right kind of experience. You have the developer experience, which is nice, and the editor experience, which is also nice on the admin panel. But I guess it's better suited for marketing people that have a decent enough understanding of some of the underlying technical concepts, because with the headless CMS, it's all about the content modeling. So you have to build, the template for your pages, the content type, and so you need to understand kind of like what you're doing in terms of creating a well-structured API, and then like you need to understand that you still need a front end, and you need to hook that API to your front end. So there's a number of concepts that are going to be important for even for the marketing people to understand as they build the content model from the admin panel, which in itself is not easy to, or it's not hard to use, but
you have to know what you're doing. I usually describe it when I'm really trying to, like, especially when you're talking to people that aren't in the marketing department that might have their hands on the purse strings, right? Is like a no-code solution is like hopping into your to your automobile, right? And it's an automatic car, right? You don't have to know how to shift. There's a gas, there's a brake, there's a steering wheel, there's turn signals. I mean, it's a very straightforward experience, right? Whereas a low code solution, you're a race car driver and you've got way more gear, way more information on the dash, and like you're shifting and you're really pushing that engine and doing technical things with it, and you're making pit stops and much more strategic with the car. Or the vehicle's entirely different, right? You're now flying a plane or you're in a boat, and you're still a captain, you're still in the driver's seat, you're still, taking the brand and that marketing experience where it needs to go. But your actual piloting experience, as you say, right, it's much more technical. But with that technical experience, you can do a lot more, right? Which is,
I love that analogy. I might have to steal it from you.
Yeah, take it, man. Well, it does help to kind of, because everybody wants to be a race car driver or a fighter pilot, right? I mean, like it does kind of, you don't have to, because one of the things that I think a lot of times the Headless CMS community, and we've talked about this before, that we really struggle with, is that it's so engineering oriented, right? Whereas, so people have this fear that like I have to know how to be a developer, or I'm going to be very reliant on developers for every single thing I need to do. But in the boat, right, the developers aren't in the engine room. They're not the captain. They're down in the belly of the ship, keeping the engine running and making sure the rudder works. That's what developers love to do. They're engineers. Whereas, the captain wants to get the boat across the sea into port, right? Deliver the goods. And I think that like those, sometimes when they hear you have to have a more technical knowledge, they think of wrenches and screws and like, gaskets, instead of, no, it's still a steering wheel, but there's like, there's 3 steering wheels, and maybe there's, you have to shift and you have to pay attention to your altitude, right? So like all of a sudden, oh, that makes a lot more sense to me. And I think it can help. I think it can really help get people on board with like, it's a similar experience to no code, but you're not so stuck in the box of no code that you can derive the experience you're looking for, right?
Yeah, that's spot on. To me, it boils down to like with a headless CMS, you have the freedom to build the interfaces the way you like them, both on the back end and the front end, because in the front end, you can use anything. You can use your favorite framework, whether it's mobile, whether it's just for your front end, like static site generator. And so you really just minimize the lock-in as much as possible on both ends of the spectrum. So I love that analogy. It kind of like really gives the pilot the kind of like the freedom to just goes wherever they want, and they just need to know how to maneuver the plane and operate the plane. But it's you're not gonna mess up with the under the hood of the engine and everything.
Right. You don't. You would never expect a fighter pilot to then be changing the gas or messing around with the oil filter on a jet, right? Like they fly, right? Well, and so you mentioned it's a spectrum, where do you see this all going, right? Because I mean, no code is so popular, like we can't necessarily say that like, there's a place for it. There are clear pros and reasons to pick a no code solution. Do you see the headless and like the more technical tooling kind of having to dumb themselves down, or do you see no code becoming, more capable of some of the experience management we're talking about, while still keeping the user experience very easy? Like where do you kind of see the spectrum of things moving as we kind of move forward, with more of a digital first, marketing and sales strategy in the wake of COVID, right?
Right. So I think it's a really good question. And I actually think we're doing the the reverse strategy. So let's pick like a no-code tool like Webflow. I know they're rebuilding, for instance, their CMS from the ground up, because I think they are moving more like to a headless kind of, because they have Webflow is composed of two parts. You have like the CMS and the front end builder, and so they are rebuilding the CMS thing to make it more like a headless CMS. And on the other hand, I think the headless CMS, at least like speaking for Strapi, what we're doing is we're going to be investing in the content editing experience as well, the admin panel, so that you can really enable the marketer to have a better collaboration experience and try to make it more accessible to less technical folks. So I see like we're kind of like really just kind of catching up with like some of the traditional CMSs in terms of feature set. WordPress and Drupal and a lot of those very traditional CMSs, they've been around for ages. So in terms of feature set, they've had like many years to have like a whole plugin of the ecosystem. But they also have like a monolithic architecture, and so there's a lot of downsides with the way it was built. So I also see them trying to re-architecture themselves into more of a headless mode. They already have headless kind of capabilities, but it's not native headless or really API first, if you will.
Right.
And so I see kind of like the entire ecosystem kind of like converging on that model of headless, because I think it makes sense. It's from a customization standpoint, from a it's linked to the move to microservices, and I guess like the API economy, like now, like every kind of like tool in the every microservices, everything has an API, everything is integrated with one another. So I think it kind of like just makes sense to kind of like move to a headless format. Now I think the question is, how can you really like provide the best experience for both? And it's kind of hard to do two things at the same time. So how do you have the best developer experience and at the same time have the best content editing experience?
Right. Well, and I think that's where a lot of the marketing world is still so focused on traditional CMS, right? Because, as we talked about earlier, right, no code is great. You can get started, you can iterate, but eventually, right, if you're doing SEO, if you're doing, a lot of content management, if you're doing, more serious things with your website, oftentimes you start to look at WordPress or, to a lesser degree, Joomla or Drupal, because those are content management systems. And there's this heavy-handed assumption in the marketplace that they are, that they're no code, right? You hear it every day. Oh, anybody can do a WordPress website. And that's true if you're using 19 plugins and somebody sets it up for you, or you watch 18 YouTube videos and you set it up yourself, right? But you're really reliant on all of these third-party integrations to make, an open source developer platform, feel no code. Whereas, so like, I think that's another thing that like the headless community and what we're kind of talking about in the API first world, we kind of have to come to terms with, right? Like, how do we educate folks and kind of get the experience understood that while sure you can use WordPress in a no code, setting, you're still dealing with all of the ramifications that no code has. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, do you see WordPress like hitting the pause on traditional WordPress and doing what Webflow is doing and just rebuilding themselves anew as like, WordPress 2.0, or do you see them trudging along and really owning, the server-based system and staying in their lane, and headless and Webflow and some of these newer concepts kind of slowly siphoning off the user base of WordPress? What do you see happening in that kind of arena?
Yeah, I think they're moving fast on headless. I think like, if you just look at a simple, like you do a Google Trends search, you'll see that the headless keyword is like it's growing exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So you can, I think, really see them moving to headless. They understand that this is what developer want. And if you look at I think it was the 2020 Stack Overflow developer survey. WordPress is one of the most dreaded platform by developers. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that experience from a developer standpoint, I think, is really painful, because you have, again, like, you rely on so many plugins that are often like misused, like they are not really well secured, they're slow, and it really impacts the performance of the website. So I really think they're slowly moving to a headless first approach, but it's not easy. Like, when you have an entire, like, again,
Ecosystem,
technically,
right? Like, yeah,
ecosystem. Yeah.
I mean, this is technical debt to the extreme, right? I mean, like, extreme technical debt. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's also like related to the programming language, right? Because it's some of the modern headless CMS, they're built in JavaScript, in Node.js, and so this is where, like, you use, like, if you have JavaScript from all the way down from the front end to the back end, I think you also have some benefits in terms of performance and experience of using kind of like one language throughout.
Right. You
So
don't
I think
have
that's
to.
another.
well, so then, you know, that was an interesting thing that you said, because, like, headless CMS as a keyword is really rising. Why should the marketing world really put their eye on headless? I mean, we've talked about no code, low code, headless CMS kind of in the low code solution block of things, giving a ton of autonomy to marketing teams. And, they can manage in an omni-channel way. They can have the experience they want, both on the back end and the front end. But, is headless CMS the term that you think the marketing community is going to grab onto? Or is there, are there other buzzwords and keywords that kind of describe headless CMS that the marketing community will embrace? And you may have more experience than I do, but I mean, in the history of WebriQ, right, talking to marketing, headless CMS is generally met with blank stares. Whereas when you talk to a developer, as you mentioned, right, it's super popular. That's awesome. We love headless. Like, how do you see the adoption of that keyword even kind of entering the marketing community? And why should the marketing community really start to understand headless CMS?
Right. I think it's a very good question, in terms of like product market fit, like headless really like resonates with developer, because they're the one feeling the pain. Again, back to what I was saying about that Stack Overflow survey, and like developers really dreading the traditional platforms. They're the one that find headless CMS in the first place, because they're really experiencing the pain. I think the pain is not as obvious for like marketing people. So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of educating that audience, that persona, on the benefit of headless. And there are multiple benefits. I think one of the main benefit I see is the notion of future proofing. As you know, a lot of marketing teams spend a lot of cycles and a lot of budget into rebuilding their website over and over again, because they need to integrate with marketing stacks are becoming more and more complex,
And they're changing faster. Yeah.
ever changing. Exactly. And so, like, making sure you have a system that is flexible enough to grow as you scale, grow with you, I guess, is super important. So that way you can, you decide to start with a website, but then the next day, or like, the next year, like, you decide to launch a mobile app. Ideally, you kind of want to centralize on one backend, and you're able to kind of like pull the content for both your website and your mobile app from the same single, again, source of truth.
Yep.
So that notion of future proofing is super important, I think, because again, from like a budget standpoint, it makes sense, and also from like a time standpoint, you just speed to market is essential. And so if you're able to speed up development by leveraging the same backend and the same logic, you don't have to rebuild that logic over and over again for every channel, or every time you change your branding. Like, think about that. Like, you company go like through rebranding all the time. And so if you change your your front end, like your whole design system and everything, you have to start from scratch. You have to reintegrate the whole thing. Whereas if you use a headless CMS, you can just, you build, you have to rebuild your front end, but then your back end is the same. You just reconnect it.
Right.
And so you save a lot of time in the process. So I think like we need to I think articulate some of that value proposition so that the marketing understands that there's a lot of value in that process. I think as marketing team also embrace more like a growth mindset. Growth marketing is becoming a very trendy topic.
Yeah.
And so I think like Headless really is a good enabler of automation on the marketing side. You can again programmatically create a lot of different landing pages for SEO. You can integrate with a lot of tools like Zapier or N8N to distribute your content automatically on many different platforms, for content syndication. It's writing content is one thing, but as a marketer, like you should spend as much time promoting your content as you should creating the content. It takes really a lot of time to write a good blog post, for instance, but if you spend that much time creating or writing the blog post, you should really invest time into promoting the content. So there's a lot to be done in terms of automating that promotion through tools again like Zapier and others. And I think there's a lot of value in using Headless CMS for that.
Yeah, I like your take on that, right? Like, future-proof your stack, basically be able to make quick iterations, changes on the fly. And then, personally, I think a lot of marketing companies should produce half the volume of content and spend 10 times the amount of time distributing it, right? Because, that's where you actually get a lot, and in some cases, right, like that's why content marketing might be starting to plateau, is because a lot of people are just producing with no concept of like, where is it going to go? Who's it for? How are we going to get it in front of people, right? We have it, but now what, That's a really good point. And I think that that resonates well with the marketing community, because they do understand that, like, if our content isn't read, why did we invest in creating it, right? Like, it's the biggest reason you make the content, right?
Right, and I think that's where I think Headless CMS can help in terms of cross-linking content as well. Is in terms of making sure the content is surfaced in the right places. Like when you have you can using your content model, you can really like make sure like you surface the blog post on that topic, show up on that page, and cross-linking on your website, and surfacing all the different kind of content, whether it's a blog, an ebook, podcast, everything. You can really just make sure you show it in the right place at the right time. And to your point, like that's how you're gonna make sure that content is really generating the value for the business, and that's where you get your ROI, by showing that content at the right place.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's a really big, there's a whole other topic there, right? The right content at the right time to the right person. But I think that's a great place for us to kind of wrap up the show. I really appreciate you being on today, Victor. Any last insights or commentary on Headless CMS and how it can really, empower and embolden the marketing community?
Yeah, I'd say that it's not just Headless CMS; it's also headless commerce. I think a lot of we see in the VC world a lot of new round of funding being announced for headless commerce. So I think there's a whole other topic of how do headless CMS and headless commerce solution, how do they work together? How do how does content help with your e-commerce strategy to help conversion? So that's another. I'll open it. We'll wrap up on that note, but I think it'd be a great topic for another episode.
Yeah.
Well, and folks that are listening are like, another headless phrase, right? But I mean, like, yeah, it's that's so true, right? Like, digital first, the propensity to spend, how content can really improve that experience. That's what, that's kind of the holy grail of the next 10 years is, how do we really create experiences that are well connected and smooth so that, users have the best experience possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Victor, thanks for having me, Alex. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.